Hi, good day. This is Rolando A. Ilando, 1M26 first year BSAB, major in mathematics from Toril, Davao City. So I presented it to Miss Giselle Pinheiro as my instructor or instructress as a logic and set theory. So here are our topic today from logic and set theory, truth tables and validity of arguments, activity 2. Argument 1. So we construct an argument which is using a logic in theory. Okay. So first is in P, we consider that on Sundays I go to church with my family. And Q, where we write it Q, when we are together as a family, we are happy. So in conclusions, R, it derives its R. On Sundays, when I go to church with my family, we are happy. So logical structure is, it is used like this. P and Q, then R. So the conclusion. How to identify the truth table from the statements? So P, Q, R, P, and conjunction. This is a conjunction of premises, which is we see the P and Q. So it is using the conjunction of premises. Then in this side is P and R is the implication of conjunction of premises, which is this will be written. So we get it valid. So to identify what is the term descriptive, what is this if it is true or it is valid. So if P, the column P is labeled by true, so it is true. Shows the result of conjunction of premises P, and then it derives. The second one is true. And the third one is true. Fourth true. Fifth false, and seventh false. 8 false, and 9 is false, or 8 rather. So if P is true from the column 1, so the Q is written for true. So this is represented by combination conditions of your premises. Then it is P is true, so Q is true again. Then next is the third one is true, then the third of the Q is a false. Then when the true is the fourth column, the Q is also false. Then first is the false. If P is false, then Q is true. If P is false, then Q is true, and P is false, then Q is false, and P is false, and the Q is false. So now we see the conjunction. You see the conclusion, which is letter R. Letter R is the evaluate implications. So we are checking it if the argument is valid. So meaning wherever the conjunction of the premises P, Q, and so the R is if true, if P is true and Q is true, the R is true. So the second one is if P is true, then Q is true, the R is false. If P is true and Q is false, it is false. If P is false and Q is true, it is true. if P is false and Q is true, the R is false. If if P is false and Q is false, it is true. So if P is false and the Q are false, so the result is false. So according to this conclusion, which is true and conclusion is false. In this case, the second row shows such a scenario making the argument invalid. So we see that P and Q, we see that PQR is true, so the result is true. So because of the conjunction. So if P is true, then Q is true, then R is false. So the result is true. Okay, and next is false, 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 and false. So the P and Q then a conclusion. So this the column labeled P and Q, then R is evaluates the implication. We are checking if the argument is valid, meaning whenever the conjunction of the premises P and Q is true, is the conclusion R also true. So here's the result. The valid column indicates whether the argument holds for the specific row. The argument is only valid overall if there are no rows where the conjunction of premises is true and the conclusion is false. In this case, the second row shows such a scenario making the argument invalid. So we see that if P, Q, R, and P and Q are true and the result is true, then second one is false and true, then true, and true, and true, and true. So as you see, there's similarities of this result. If the false from the below is false and false, it's all false, it is written to be a true. So if true and false, then true and false, we see it. Why is the answer is true? Because if the P statement true and the second one is false, then the last one is false, it is true. So it is a valid. First row is yes and the second row is no. So this is the only that not valid. So conjunction, the result of P and Q is implicitly shown in the fourth column. In negation, there are no columns representing the negation of P, Q, or R in this truth table because the argument as stated does not contain any negative proposition. So this is the proposition. If the argument had statement like not P, we would have a separate column for that. It is a tautology. The final implication column P and Q then R is not always true. Okay, it's false in the second row here. So therefore the argument structure is not a tautology. A tautology would have all true values in its final truth table column. So this is not a tautology. How about argument 2? I feel so confused with myself and I found out the blindness. So let's identify the distinct proposition within the sentence. So C is derived I feel confused with myself. Then B, I found out the blindness. So we can interpret this as I am blind. Now, let's look at the logical connected with used in this sentence. So, conjunction. The word and connects. The word and it is connect the two parts of sentence, indicating that both propositions are being asserted. So, the sentence can be represented logically as like this. So, C and B. So, we would even form implications although they aren't directly stated in the sentence. So, like this. Negation, I do not feel confused with myself, and negation B, I did not find out the blindness, or I'm not blind. So we would even form implications although they aren't directly stated in the sentence view. So we write it like this: B, then C. If I am blind, then I feel confused with myself. Then C, then B. If I feel confused with myself, then I am blind. So this might or might not be true depending on the experience. This I am blind, then I feel confused with myself. Then if I feel confused with myself, then I am blind. This is likely false, as confusion can have many causes. Okay, this table shows. So we show the table's truth that the statement I feel confused with myself and I found out the blindness is considered true in logic only in the first row where both the feeling of confusion C is true. So second one is true and third one is false and fourth is false. So if C is true, then a B is only also a true. Then the second one is false. Then third one is true. Then the fourth one is false. Then we see the C, the implication or the proposition of C and B. We see the last column. If there is true or false, so if C and B is true, the result is the only true. If C is true and the B is false, and the result is false. So if C is false and B is true, the result is false also. So if C is false and B is false, the result only of C and B is false. So is this the valid? Only one is the only valid. Only all true, but the other one is false. Okay. Proposition C, I feel confused with myself. B, I am blind. So the connective is conjunction and. Then logically, and the logical form of our sentence is C and B. So like this. C and B. So this is the logical form of our sentence. Next one is the argument 3. The word so often implies a causal relationship of a consequence, which is service was ongoing, so I hurried to go inside. So service was ongoing is if we derive S, and H is I hurried to go inside. The application in logic, we can represent A, so B as if A, then B, then it write it A, then B. So next one is we call, so H service was going, hard to go inside is the H, so it will be happen. H, then H. So it is to write it. Next one, to show the truth table of this statement can be represented in the form of implication. So if the service was ongoing, then I hurried to go inside. Now let's analyze this using a truth table. The truth table can be used for depends. Now, the truth table shows the conditions under which the implication, if H, then H is true. Okay, we write it S is true, then S is true and false, then H is true and H is true, then S is false, then the H is also true. If S is false and H is false. So the scenario aligns with the rows where S then H is the only true. And then aside, row 1, S is true, then H is true, then supports the statement if the service was going is true and the hurry inside it is true, then the implication holds this. Then the second row, S is true, then second row is S true, then H is false. So the result of this contradicts the statement it is only a false. The next one is true. So if the row 3 S is false and H is true, this doesn't necessarily contradict the statement. So the result is only the implication is also a true. Logically, then the S is false, then the H is false, the H then H is the result is valid or is true. So is this a valid? This 4 is only a valid or not? So let me see the logically. Okay, it is first row is yes, and the second row is no, and the third one is yes, and the fourth one is yes. So the only one is not valid is there is true, false, and the only one is the second row. That's all our logically how to explain and how to know that truth table can be used our argument sentence. So now try this one if you and comment below what's your answer and see the truth. What is the complete table of this question? Now thank you for watching.